My daughter invited her real dad to walk her down the aisle. Those were the words that drifted through the phone line that morning. Soft, polite, and sharp enough to carve through 20 years of silence. I remember staring at the old oak table in my kitchen, the one I built back when Emily still ran barefoot through the yard, asking why nails were silver. The air in Savannah was thick with heat even before noon, but I felt cold. It wasn't the kind of cold that comes from weather. It was the kind that begins in the chest, right behind the ribs, where love and regret share the same space. My real dad, she said again, as if the phrase had no history attached to it. She didn't mean to hurt me. People rarely do when they've already forgotten how much you mattered. I cleared my throat and asked when the wedding would be. She gave me the date, the church, the time, every detail but the one I wished for most. Would you like to come? Still, I told her I'd be there. I said it gently, the way a man speaks when he knows his words will echo in an empty house later that night. My name is Anthony Baldwin. I'm 56 years old, a retired carpenter, and the only thing I've ever built that truly mattered is the one thing I no longer recognize: my family. After Linda left, I stayed in Savannah, fixing porches and church benches, watching seasons change through the same cracked window. People said I was too quiet for my own good. Maybe they were right. Silence became a habit. It was easier to sand away the edges of wood than the edges of memory. That morning, the phone call left a ring in my ears long after it ended. I stepped outside to the porch where the moss hung low from the trees. The world looked the same, yet I felt misplaced in it. Somewhere across town, my daughter was planning her wedding, and the man she called Dad was probably helping her choose flowers. I told myself it didn't matter. She was happy, that should have been enough. But when you've spent your life being replaced, happiness starts to sound like something other people deserve. Later that afternoon, I found the old photo of Emily at age 8, her front teeth missing, her arms around my neck. Behind us was the half-finished wooden swing I built for her. The swing's still there, creaking in the wind, though she hasn't sat on it in years. I wiped the dust from the frame and realized I'd kept every promise but one. I'd never stopped loving her, even when she stopped calling me Dad. When evenings settled over Savannah, I sat at my workbench carving a small box from cedar, something simple, something only her hands would recognize. Inside, I planned to place a note. For Emily, built with the same hands that once built your first home. That night, as the cicadas hummed and the street lights blinked to life, I whispered a prayer I hadn't said in decades. Not for forgiveness, for strength. Because the next time I saw my daughter, I'd be sitting in the back of a church watching another man walk beside her. I told myself I could handle it, that I'd keep my peace no matter how much it tore through me. But when she called again, her voice steadier this time, she said, "He'll walk me down the aisle, Dad." I smiled into the receiver, though she couldn't see it. My throat tightened. Something in me broke, and the sound it made was quieter than a heart should ever be.
After the call, sleep didn't come easily. I kept hearing her voice, polite, careful, distant, as if every word had been rehearsed. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, spinning slow circles above me, thinking how strange it is that life keeps moving even after you've stopped feeling part of it. People in Savannah still remember the day Linda left. They said it was inevitable, a woman like her, tired of small houses and slow paychecks. Richard Hale offered her the kind of life I never could. Charity galas, lake houses, marble floors that stayed cold even in August. I watched her go without a word, holding Emily's hand as if she were leading her out of poverty instead of love. I didn't chase them. Maybe I should have, but I'd seen enough broken things to know when something couldn't be fixed. So I stayed. I rebuilt the porch, sanded the swing, kept the lights on. And every birthday that passed without a phone call felt like another nail sealing a coffin that still had my heart inside it. When people asked about Linda, I said she was doing fine. When they asked about Emily, I said she was studying hard. Lies told kindly still count as love, I suppose. I kept working as a carpenter, small jobs, nothing fancy, churches, schools, old homes. There's a rhythm to woodwork. Measure, cut, sand, finish. You can lose entire years in the repetition, and that's exactly what I did. One afternoon, about a decade after they left, I heard their names again. I was fixing a banister at City Hall when a secretary mentioned that Richard Hale's foundation had just donated a fortune to local scholarships. People called him a hero of Savannah. His photo was in the paper, smiling, arm around Linda, Emily standing between them in a white dress. She looked 16, radiant, and absolutely nothing like the little girl who used to fall asleep in my truck after school. I remember setting down my hammer and just standing there. For a moment, the world felt heavier than my own body. I wasn't jealous of his wealth. I was jealous of how easy it was for him to steal the part of my life that mattered most and wear it like a badge. I went home that night and opened a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside were letters I'd written to Emily but never mailed, birthday notes, small updates, things like the dog finally had puppies or I fixed the fence by the creek. Simple words from a man trying to stay part of a world that had already moved on. As I read through them, I realized I'd been waiting, foolishly, maybe, for the day she'd see things clearly, that someday she'd ask questions, look beyond the stories her mother told. But the years passed, and the silence between us grew roots. Still, I never spoke a word against Linda or Richard. Savannah loves its gossip, but I refused to feed it. I figured Emily would understand one day. The truth doesn't need defending, it just needs time. Now, 20 years later, time was almost up. She was marrying into the same circle that once tore us apart. The wedding announcement in the paper called Richard a pillar of integrity and a man devoted to the people of Savannah. Everyone called Richard a hero, but heroes don't build fortunes out of other people's pain. And as I folded the newspaper, I realized I'd been wrong all along. The truth doesn't just need time. Sometimes it needs someone brave enough to bring it back into the light.
3 days before the wedding, I decided to bring Emily her gift, a small cedar box I'd carved myself, lined with blue felt, polished until the grain shone like gold under sunlight. It wasn't much, but I hoped she'd recognize the hands that made it. Savannah was glowing that afternoon, the kind of light that makes the river look like it's holding secrets. I walked up the long driveway to Linda's house, or Richard's house, I should say, with that box tucked under my arm and a heart that didn't quite know if it should beat faster or slower. The place was enormous. White columns, wraparound porch, trimmed hedges cut sharper than most people's manners. When I rang the bell, I half expected someone else to answer. Someone who didn't know my name. But Emily opened the door herself. For a second, time folded. She had her mother's eyes and my quiet way of standing. She looked surprised. Not unhappy, not overjoyed, just surprised that I'd actually shown up. "Dad," she said softly, as if testing whether the words still fit. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, and handed her the box. She smiled politely. That's when I realized her smile had learned to be careful. Inside, the house smelled of lilies and new paint. Every wall was covered with portraits, family photos that didn't include me. We sat in the parlor where the air felt too clean to breathe. She talked about the wedding, the dress, the guests, the menu. She mentioned Richard's name more than once. "He's been amazing," she said. "He had him helped pay for my college, you know." I nodded, even though something in me shifted. That wasn't true. I'd been sending checks every semester, small ones, sometimes late, but enough to cover books and fees. I sent them through Linda's lawyer to avoid conflict. Emily never knew. "Sounds like he's done a lot for you," I managed to say. She didn't look up. "He's been there," she said. "All these years, he's been there." That sentence hung in the air like dust in sunlight. Beautiful from afar, choking up close. I stood, told her I wouldn't stay long. She thanked me for coming, kissed my cheek like someone fulfilling a duty. I told her the box was just a keepsake, something to remind her of home. She smiled again, the polite kind. On my way out, I caught a glimpse of Linda at the top of the stairs. We locked eyes for half a second. Hers was steady, practiced, the eyes of someone who's rewritten the past so many times it almost sounds true. She didn't say a word. Neither did I. Outside, the air felt heavier. The trees around the house seemed older than I remembered. I stood on the sidewalk, watching the light change, trying to convince myself I'd done the right thing by staying calm. By the time I reached my truck, the box she held was already fading from my mind, replaced by that sentence, "He's been there." Back home, I sat on the porch, replaying every word of our conversation. The silence at the house pressed down harder than usual. Then I noticed something strange, a shadow on the edge of the yard. Someone standing near the gate, waiting. I stepped closer. She was an older woman, silver hair tied back neatly, holding a brown envelope in her hands. I didn't recognize her right away, but she spoke my name as if she'd known me all my life. "Mr. Baldwin," she said. "I'm Marianne Lewis. We used to work in the same church fund years ago. I think we need to talk." She glanced toward the envelope, then back at me, her expression grave. "It's about Richard and your daughter's scholarship," she said quietly. Marianne followed me onto the porch as twilight crept across the moss-covered oaks. The light in Savannah has a way of softening everything, except the truth. I invited her to sit, poured 2 glasses of sweet tea, and waited for her to speak. She placed the envelope on the table between us, careful, like it carried something fragile. "I hesitated before coming," she said, "but after what I found, I couldn't keep it to myself." Her hands trembled as she slid the papers out. Bank records, letters, receipts stamped with the Hale Foundation logo, the same charity Savannah worshipped for funding scholarships and community projects. "I used to help with their bookkeeping," she continued. "After I retired, I started going through old files to close accounts. That's when I noticed the numbers didn't add up." I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" She pointed to a line on one of the statements. "See this account? It's supposed to be the student aid fund. But these transfers," she tapped her finger, "went straight to Richard Hale's personal holdings. Millions over the years, including one labeled as a scholarship for your daughter." For a moment, I didn't understand. Then the air left my lungs all at once. "You're saying he stole the money meant for her?" Marianne nodded slowly. "Not just her, dozens of students. But I knew you, Anthony. I knew what kind of man you were. I couldn't stand by and watch him get away with it." I stared at the documents. My name wasn't anywhere, but my silence was. I had let him take everything. My family, my reputation, and now I realized he'd stolen something far greater than who Emily thought he was. "How long have you known?" I asked. "Long enough to know he's untouchable," she said. "He's got the city in his pocket, the police, the papers. The mayor's godson married his niece last year." It sounded like something out of a bad dream, but in Savannah, influence lasts longer than truth. I sat back in my chair, listening to the crickets start their night chorus. Marianne watched me quietly, as if waiting for anger to arrive. But anger didn't arrive. What came instead was clarity, cold, sharp, final. She's getting married in 3 days, I said. He'll walk her down that aisle in front of half the town. Marianne's voice softened. You could expose him now. Go to the authorities? I shook my head. No. If I go to the police, she'll hear it from strangers. She'll think I did it out of spite. She'll hate you, she warned. She already does, I said gently. At least this way, she'll hate me for the right reason. I gathered the papers, sliding them back into the envelope. My hands felt steady for the first time in years. Marianne stood to leave. Be careful, Anthony. Men like him don't fall quietly. I nodded. Neither do fathers who've got nothing left to lose. When she was gone, I sat alone on the porch, the night pressing close. The cicadas sang and the world smelled of wet earth and old wood. I looked at the stars through the branches and wondered how long truth could stay buried before it clawed its way to the surface. Inside, I placed the envelope on my workbench, beside the tools I trusted most. It sat there like something alive, humming with the weight of what it carried. I poured myself another glass of tea but didn't drink it. The clock ticked softly, each second pulling me closer to something I couldn't yet name. I folded the papers back into the envelope. Tomorrow, she'd finally see who he really was.
The morning of the wedding arrived soft and golden, the kind of Savannah morning that fools you into believing nothing bad could ever happen beneath skies that blue. The air was still, the church bells slow and patient in the distance. I woke before sunrise. Sleep had been shallow, filled with half-dreams of Emily as a child, running down the hallway, calling my name. I sat at the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the old suit hanging on the back of the door, the same one I'd worn when I married Linda. Time had faded it to a gentler shade of gray, but it still carried the scent of cedar from the closet. When I put it on, it didn't quite fit the same. The shoulders felt heavier. The man inside it wasn't the same either. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the tie I hadn't worn in years. The reflection that looked back at me was a stranger with familiar eyes. There's a certain silence that settles on a man when he realizes his purpose isn't to win anymore, it's to endure. By 8, Savannah was already awake. The streets shimmered with heat rising from the cobblestones. I drove toward St. Peter's Church, past the riverfront where tourists took pictures and families laughed beneath the shade. To them, it was just another Saturday. To me, it was the day I'd lose my daughter one more time. The church was beautiful. White columns, stained glass, flowers at every step. I parked a few blocks away and walked the rest, each step slow, deliberate. No one noticed me slip in. Guests filled the pews, voices soft with perfume and gossip. I chose a seat in the back row, near the last window where the light fell just right. I liked being near exits. Old habit, maybe. Emily looked stunning when she entered, her gown catching the light like water. The whole room seemed to breathe in at once. Then beside her came Richard Hale, handsome, confident, proud. The perfect man to lead her down the aisle in the eyes of Savannah. People stood as the music swelled. He smiled that politician's smile, shaking hands as he passed. And I sat quietly, feeling the kind of ache that no medicine could touch. When they reached the altar, Emily turned her head slightly, scanning the room. For a moment, our eyes met. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. I hoped she could read something in my expression, some trace of the truth waiting to rise. Outside, through the stained glass, I caught a flicker of movement. 2 dark cars pulled up quietly to the curb, unmarked, the kind of cars that didn't belong to wedding guests. I leaned forward slightly, my pulse steady, my breath measured. The doors opened, and 2 men in suits stepped out. They spoke briefly with someone by the gate, then began walking toward the church entrance. Inside, the music softened. The priest began his blessing.
Richard clasped Emily's hand proudly, a father's gesture. At least that's what everyone thought. The air felt different now, charged and waiting. A woman entered quietly through the side aisle, Mary Ann Lewis. She didn't look toward me, but I saw the envelope clutched against her chest. Her face was pale, set with resolve. Richard hadn't seen her yet. He was too busy basking in the admiration, the applause, the illusion. I straightened my tie and exhaled slowly. For months, I had prayed for peace, but some peace only comes after the storm. The air inside St. Peter's Church felt different now. Thick, alive, almost trembling. Sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, breaking into fragments of color that danced across the aisle. The choir's voices rose like smoke, slow and graceful, filling the rafters with borrowed holiness. From where I sat, the back pew felt a mile away. Every breath I took sounded too loud. The smell of lilies and candle wax filled the room, sweet and heavy. The priest cleared his throat. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" Richard stepped forward, smiling that polished public smile. His voice carried easily, confident, rehearsed. "Her father does," he said. The words landed like a hammer inside my chest. Her father does. The room echoed with quiet approval. But before he could step back, before the priest could move on, the church doors creaked open behind me. The sound was small, but it sliced through the ceremony like thunder. Every head turned toward the entrance. Two men in dark suits stood there, badges glinting faintly under the morning light. Behind them, Mary Ann Lewis held a manila envelope to her chest. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. For a moment, no one moved. Even the choir faltered, their notes hanging unfinished in the air. Richard turned slowly, his hand still clutching Emily's. His smile froze halfway, the confident mask beginning to crack. The lead agent stepped forward. His voice was calm, official, almost apologetic. "Richard Hale, you're under federal investigation for financial fraud and embezzlement. We have a warrant for your arrest." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The sound of whispers rushed like wind through leaves. Emily's bouquet trembled in her hands. What is this?" she stammered. Richard's voice wavered for the first time. He said, "There must be a mistake." He forced a laugh that no one joined. "This is ridiculous." But the agents didn't flinch. One of them reached for the envelope. Mary Ann opened it, revealing the papers, the same ones that had sat on my workbench 2 nights earlier. The truth, laid out in black ink and signatures. The priest stepped back from the altar, silent. I stayed seated, my hands resting on the pew in front of me. I hadn't planned to stand. This wasn't my victory to claim. It was hers to see. The sound of metal cuffs clicked faintly. Emily's eyes widened, filling with tears. Richard looked toward me then, really looked, and for the first time I saw fear where arrogance used to live. He tried to speak, but the words fell apart. The agents led him toward the aisle, past rows of stunned guests and frozen smiles. The choir didn't sing again. No one clapped. The only sound left was the quiet echo of polished shoes on stone. Mary Ann followed them out, her head low. For a long moment, the church stayed still. The candles flickered. The flowers bent slightly in the draft. Emily stood there, trembling, staring at the space her stepfather had just left. I wanted to go to her, to tell her I was sorry, to hold her the way I used to when storms scared her as a child, but I didn't move. Some truths have to be felt, not explained. When she finally turned around, our eyes met across the aisle. No words, just the weight of everything that had ever gone unsaid. And in that silence, I realized something. I didn't need to defend who I was anymore. The truth had done it for me. The man who stole my family was finally the one in handcuffs. No one moved for what felt like forever. The doors of the church swung shut behind the agents, and silence poured in like fog. The guests sat frozen, eyes darting from the altar to Emily, as if waiting for someone to explain what had just shattered before them. The priest cleared his throat once, then quietly stepped away. Even he knew some truths didn't need a sermon. Emily stood at the altar, still holding her bouquet, her knuckles white around the stems. She looked like she was trying to wake from a dream that refused to end. "Dad," she whispered. But it wasn't me she was looking at. Her gaze was fixed on the doors, where Richard Hale had just disappeared. I watched her shoulders rise and fall, her breathing shallow, the lace of her dress trembling with each breath. The sunlight through the stained glass painted her in shifting colors, blue, red, gold, like the church itself couldn't decide what to make of her pain. Finally, she turned toward me. Her eyes searched mine, desperate for some explanation. "You knew?" she asked, voice breaking halfway. I stood slowly. The weight of every year between us settled on my shoulders. "I did," I said. She took a step closer. "For how long?" "Long enough to know what kind of man he really was," I said. My voice was steady, but inside my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Her jaw trembled. "And you didn't say anything?" I shook my head. "Would you have listened?" That question hung between us, heavier than accusation. She blinked back tears. "You could have stopped this." "I could have ruined it," I said, quietly. "And I didn't want to take your dream away. Not again." The words hit her like a tide. I could see the war in her eyes, the years of loyalty to the man she'd called Dad colliding with the truth now clawing its way to the surface. Guests began to slip out quietly, one by one, their shoes echoing against the marble floor. Savannah would be talking by sundown. Secrets don't last long here, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was the space between my daughter and me, a space built on years of silence and misunderstandings. She dropped the bouquet. It hit the floor softly, petals scattering like everything else that used to be perfect. "I thought he loved me," she said, voice barely a whisper. "He probably thought he did," I replied. "But love built on lies can't hold." Tears streamed down her cheeks now, silent and endless. I wanted to go to her, to wipe them away like I used to when she scraped her knees as a little girl. But I didn't move. Sometimes a father has to let his child face the storm before offering shelter. She finally took a step toward me. Her lips parted as if to speak, but instead she reached out and touched my sleeve, just a fingertip trembling. "You knew," she whispered, again, softer this time, "and you still let me choose." That broke something open in both of us. I nodded. "You deserve to see him for who he was, not who people said he was. Truth doesn't need revenge, Emily. It just needs a moment to stand." She pressed her hand against her mouth, trying to contain the sob that escaped anyway. I saw her shoulders shake, and all I could do was stand there, an old man watching the girl he raised rediscover what real love looks like. Not proud, not loud, just steady. The choir hadn't sung another note, but the church still felt full of everything that finally made sense. And in that moment, I realized something else. I hadn't lost her. I'd just been waiting for her to find her way back. Savannah woke heavy with rain the morning after the wedding that never happened. The sky hung low over the river, gray and thoughtful, as if the whole city needed time to breathe. I sat on my porch with a mug of coffee gone cold, listening to the soft hiss of water against the oak leaves. I hadn't heard from Emily all night. The news had already spread. Richard Hale arrested at the altar, his empire of charity exposed as a shell of deceit. Savannah's papers would turn it into spectacle, but for me, it was just the quiet end of a long ache. I'd told myself she needed space. Sometimes silence isn't distance, it's recovery. By noon, I heard footsteps on the gravel path. I looked up, and there she was. No veil, no bouquet, just my daughter, standing in the drizzle, clutching the same small cedar box I'd given her days earlier. Her hair was damp, her eyes red from crying, but she looked more like herself than she had in years. "Hi, Dad," she said. And that one word sounded different now. Real. Unborrowed. I stood, unsure whether to move closer. She took the step for me. Then she placed the box on the table and sat across from me like she used to when she was little, waiting for pancakes to cool. "I found something," she said softly, pulling an envelope from her purse. It was old, edges yellowed, my name written in Linda's handwriting. Mary Ann gave it to me. She said Mom left it years ago, before everything. Her hands shook as she passed it to me. I stared at the name, Anthony, and for a moment, all the years collapsed. "Do you want me to read it?" she asked. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. She opened the letter carefully. Her voice wavered as she began. "If you're reading this, it means our paths have gone different ways. I can't promise you I'm right, but I know one thing. No matter where life takes Emily, she'll need you. She may forget that. Don't you? Protect her, even when she doesn't know who you really are." Her voice broke near the end. She folded the letter slowly and set it on the table. The sound of rain filled the silence between us. "I don't remember her writing that," I said. "She must have known," she whispered, "about everything, about him." For a long while we didn't speak. Then she reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was small but sure, the same way it used to be when she was 5 and afraid of thunder. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said, "for believing what I wanted to believe." I squeezed her hand gently. "Don't be. We all see what love lets us see." The rain slowed, turning to a mist that softened the edges of everything. Somewhere down the street, a bell rang from the church that had witnessed it all. She glanced at the letter again. "You didn't want revenge, did you?" I shook my head. "I didn't want him ruined. I just wanted you to see the truth." She nodded, tears mixing with the rain. We sat there until the clouds broke apart, sunlight dripping through the branches. She stood finally, the cedar box in her arms. "I think I'll keep this," she said with a faint smile. "It smells like home." As she walked down the path, the world felt lighter. I leaned back in my chair, the letters still on the table, the ink bleeding slightly from a stray drop of rain. She thought I'd come to ruin her wedding, but all I came for was her trust. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt like a father again.